The New York Liberty's newest assistant coach is Sonia Raman, and she has a story unlike, I would say, any other assistant in the WNBA. We're going to talk about how she got here. We're going to talk about what's ahead. We're going to talk about a little bit of everything. Locked on Women's Basketball starts now.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, good morning and welcome to Locked On Women's Basketball. I'm your host, Howard Megdal, and I want to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. More than 300,000 of you listened in March alone, and it was an incredible March we had. We had not just me, but the incredible staff across the board at thenexthoops.com, over 150 reported pieces in, around, at March Madness, right on through into April and the WNBA draft. We cover the game we love every single day. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. $9 a month, $72 a year, thenexthoops.com. It all gets delivered right to your inbox. Every podcast, every story we do. Make sure we cover this game in the way it has always deserved. We're here to do it. And to that end, I'm fascinated for the opportunity to talk to the newest assistant coach with the New York Liberty, somebody whose story resonates with me. And as somebody who I went to a D3 myself, it was not at the level of success that Tufts has had. But Sonia, when we talk about the level of success that even Tufts had, people should know this was before, right? When you attended, that was before the machine that Carla Berube took over and took routinely to the Final Four. But kind of take me through your journey to playing there, what that experience was like, and specifically sort of how it led you into coaching.
Sure. It was an incredible experience. It was the beginning, kind of the jumpstart of my coaching career, I would say. Especially because when I was at Tufts, I played for 3 coaches in 4 years.
Right.
So I was immediately exposed to different coaching styles, different coaching philosophies, needing to get on board as quickly as I can with each new coach and, their philosophy. And I think that's where I formed some of my greatest friendships with my teammates. And that was always the constant, as the coaching changes happen. I had my teammates and we had our locker room and we were really tight. And I just really, really love that experience. Junior year, I broke my leg. And so I was actually out for, midway through my junior year through midway through my senior year. And when I was there, I was a walk-on. I wasn't playing a lot. My role was much more off the bench. But once you're injured, there's no chance that you're playing, so that just changes, someone's entire focus. And for me, it really started to shift my focus to my teammates, to my coaches, observing what they were doing, finding any way I could to just help the team, and I think that's what led me to become a better leader, became a captain of the team my senior year, even while I was sidelined still. And just I learned that I wish I had known when I was a younger player, that we don't always realize when we're playing, that you start to see things through a different lens, standing behind your assistant coaches, behind your head coach with a clipboard, starting to do some scouting for them, my senior year. And that led to me staying on and coaching with them on their staff after I graduated. So I ended up with a full 4-year experience with one coach, 2 as a player and 2 as an assistant.
It's so interesting to me. There's so many different players, even folks who end up in the pros who, by virtue of getting injured, end up having that experience and that different way of seeing things. It's sort of a digression, but I wonder if is there a way to, and do you think there would be an advantage to even holding healthy players out of X amount of practices a month in order to get that sort of sense?
Yeah, I'm not advocating for that. I think that there's always a way to find perspective, and that lesson taught me to find that and to find silver linings in anything that happens in life. I was really young when it happened. So, if someone had said to me, there's a silver lining in all of this, I don't know if I would have really resonated at the time. But going through that experience at a young age, I think it really started to make me understand, like, you go through adversity and you're going to learn some sort of lesson. You don't know what it is. You don't know how it's going to help you down the road. I would never realize that experience would have eventually led me to, the New York Liberty in its own way, at that time. But I think that's just overall a lesson that, when you go through adversity, when you go through challenges, you get to the other side of it, and you do find ways to, to get stronger and to build some skills that you may not have had otherwise.
How did you fall in love with the game? What was it that led you to first discovering basketball?
Yeah, my mom watched a lot of basketball when I was growing up. When she moved to America, it was upstate New York, and she was a Syracuse fan. So, I started watching that. And then we moved to Boston back in 1984. So that was kind of the height of the Celtics dominance, and, really dove in as a Celtics fan. But I didn't start playing organized basketball till about the 8th grade. I had played soccer growing up. And just kind of found a court when we would go play tennis as a family. There was a basketball court next door. And so I grabbed a basketball and started just, shooting hoops. Eventually, got my family to put a hoop up in the driveway, and then eventually, joined a team in the 8th grade, and really have never looked back. I've kind of always been a part of a team ever since.
I mean, that was a good era to discover basketball, but it's so interesting to me. Again, it's on the men's basketball side, and there are sort of these arbitrary lines that I feel like have been drawn through the years. So often, I think, at the expense of women's basketball, as we decide, oh well, we're this kind of fan, but not that kind of fan. Do you think that being introduced to it the way you have has allowed you to view basketball in a more holistic way than folks who come up with purely men's basketball or purely women's basketball have over the last, couple of generations?
Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it. And maybe, I think for me, just like basketball's always been basketball. I was certainly following the Celtics growing up. I was also, consuming college women's basketball. It was harder to do. There wasn't as much being televised, but like I remember, trying to convince my parents, or just doing it anyway, staying up till like midnight to watch a Stanford women's basketball game. And they were really dominant, in the 90s. And that's kind of when I was, in high school, and that was one of the teams that I followed. So I think I just gravitated towards watching the best teams and trying to, understand what made them great. I didn't know I was doing that at the time, but I was always curious as to what made great teams, as great as they are. But also, I've just always loved like the joy that comes with teams like that, and seeing the players and their experiences, and the coaches that are able to find ways to enjoy those moments and to find joy. So I think I've just always gravitated towards that, whether it's men's basketball or women's basketball, kind of like whatever's on TV and whatever I can access.
It's one thing to love the game, as so many of us do. It's another thing to decide to make a career of it. And obviously, again, Tufts as a launching pad to a professional coaching career, there's not a lot of precedent for it. So I'm wondering for you, two parts to that, right? One, when did you realize this was what you wanted to do? And two, when did you realize it was something you could do?
Yeah, it was not on my radar, being a full-time coach as a career. I went to law school a couple years after I graduated from Tufts. I had been on their coaching staff, and it wasn't always something that I was aware of, but I was kind of like always on this path. So even in law school, I was scouting for Tufts. I was going and, doing some advanced scouting work for them. It was back when, you didn't have access to opponent's film. So you might get your hands on like one VHS tape of an opponent. And if, someone had rolled their ankle in that game and they didn't play, you're not really getting a good picture. So I was doing that in my spare time. I was coaching a regional team in, a summer game situation. And then after I graduated from law school, it was like, all right, here I go. I'm going to start my legal career. And then the head coach at Wellesley College contacted me, and I coached a couple of her players in the summer games. And she was going to be out on maternity leave and just needed someone to help out for the second half of the season when she went on a maternity leave. And that's kind of the stipend that they had, right? It was like semester 2. And I was like, all right, well, if I'm going to, I'd be happy to help. I had a pretty flexible, day job. And, but I was like, if I'm going to do this, like, let's go, like, let's start now. And that's kind of how it started with, getting back into assistant coaching. And I figured, I can do anything for one season, right? I can go to work at 6 a.m. and, leave by 3:30 and get to practices and use all my vacation time for like away games and tournaments, and no big deal. It's just a season. And, 6 seasons later, and, through, Kathy's mentorship, she was constantly in my ear, like, this is something you should be doing as your career. Like, this is clearly your passion. And it was. And so I think with her encouragement, the MIT job opened up. It was a head coaching position, and it was also a compliance position. Mm-hmm. And it just kind of felt like all the worlds were coming together. I could use my JD on the compliance side, coaching these young women that were, in STEM fields. Like, the whole thing just really appealed to me. And that's kind of how it happened.
It's so fascinating. And again, you're fortunate to have a voice early on telling you about this. I mean, for so many people, it's discovering their path was a solo pursuit. Like, Cheryl Rivas talked about the fact that well into her head coaching career, her father would ask her when she was going to get a real job. And so it's trying to figure out sort of how and where you get there is, that's always so interesting to me. Well, we have to talk about MIT, and we have to talk about the powerhouse that you built there. Much more to come with Sonia Raman, New York Liberty assistant coach. I'm Howard Megdal. You're listening to Locked On Women's Basketball. But first, Locked On Women's Basketball is brought to you by Game Time. Now, right now, there is a league playing called the NBA. For those listeners who don't know, it's the where men play professional basketball. It's a perfectly great place to watch games while you wait for the WNBA to start in the middle of next month. And so every bucket, every defensive stop, every moment there is available to you with Game Time. Not here in Philadelphia, where I record this program. There's no playoffs down in Philly, but there are in cities around the country, and Game Time makes it fast and easy to get those playoff tickets. Prices on the app actually go down as tip-off gets closer, and last-minute deals can save you up to 60%. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. Yeah, they need the distraction of a WNBA team here in Philly because it was a rough season on the NBA side for sure. So I am back with New York Liberty assistant coach Sonia Raman, and I want to talk about MIT basketball, which is not a thing that we do often enough on this program, right? But it's so striking to me, and for those folks who are not necessarily plugged into it to understand the high level D3 and the level of play that you are. I mean, first of all, you're part of this powerhouse conference. Second of all, you are building a team that is regularly contending. Was that a heavier lift at MIT, which I would, and maybe this is a controversial thing to say, slightly more known for academics than athletics?
Not controversial at all. I think that the athletics program at MIT is probably the best kept secret. When I was there, routinely top 10 in the Director's Cup, which it's a measurement of athletics only. Doesn't matter what you do academically. And so just measuring athletics programs out of about 350 Division III schools, consistently in the top 10. So, if that's a Division I athletics program, you'd probably be hearing about it all the time. But of course, there's a lot of incredible feats that happen at MIT, and, all of those, equally or more important, and so, deservedly get the credit. But I think the student athletes at MIT are really special. First of all, they they get in on their own merit. So recruiting is certainly a challenge. Like you said, there's a heavy lift there. I think the heavy lift isn't necessarily convincing people to want to come to MIT. It's mostly that you're going to have to wait until the admissions decisions come out, and hope for the best, really. And that's really different. It's unique compared to other coaches, right? That can give you a likely letter or kind of a guaranteed spot in advance, right? Because they're getting those early reads from admissions. So that was probably the biggest challenge. And so it took a little bit longer than I think I thought. I mean, again, I was like new and young into my career. I kind of did what I think people do at younger stages of their career, which is, like I said, a 5-year plan, and like in 5 years, I'll be where I ended up, getting, this group together. It took about 8 or 9 years. And, it was such a group and collective effort to do that with my coaching staffs and the alumni and the whole community at MIT. But it was a much bigger undertaking, and it took a lot longer. But the journey was so worth it. I mean, every team, I can look back and just have such fond memories of moments in those seasons, moments that, I think help propel us to the next season, and that ability to just get a little bit further down the road than we were the season before. But, just staying connected to those women, even now, I mean, they've all gone on to do, incredible things with their lives. One of them is actually in coaching as well, on the side, and she's got her day job and she's coaching on the side. And I keep wondering if that's going to be her path too.
Where's she coaching? If you don't mind me asking,
she's coaching University of Chicago.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. So shout out to her. So it was an incredible experience. I mean, we have an alum that went on the space station last year. Like it's a great group. They're a family, they're a sisterhood. And, I learned a lot about success, about failure, about learning from failure. And really, I think I've always sort of had this growth mindset, but I think that really came together during my time there. And it was partly because of the women I coached. Like they all kind of have this engineering approach, right? Like it's like this iterative process of improvement. And that's what they're doing with their problem sets as engineers. There's not failure just means you're on to 2.0, you're on to 3.0, you're just figuring it out. And so I just always felt like every game, there's always the next game to try to get even better and to try to improve. And so I think the biggest thing was trying to make sure that I was injecting joy along the way as well. So that it was truly the best part of their day. It was always my goal to have that practice window of 5 to 7 be the best part of their day.
So how do you do it? How do you inject joy into a practice?
I think talking to the players a lot and listening to, what their pain points are, what they're trying to do, make their life easier, make them part of the process so that they're really owning a lot of what we do. Offensively, I gave our players a lot of freedom on the court, really tried to work with our point guards to understand, how to dial something up on the court, how to attack a mismatch, how to attack a switch. So that once they were out there playing, they could play, with way more freedom, with some structure around it, but kind of their game, their call. And of course, when the time comes for me to have to interject or to call a timeout or to draw something up for them, I'm there. But I tried to make it so that we all learned the game, and not just how to run sets and how to, go from A to B to C, but how to play the game of basketball.
So I want to talk about that because I think that's a really important and significant part of this story, right? Which is at the time I read, you're going to Boston Celtics practices and you're trying to incorporate NBA into Division III. And I just wonder, was there a moment there where you determined basketball is basketball and here's an opportunity to be able to universalize the sport in the way we think about it?
Yeah. I was going to Celtics practices. I was going to college practices as well. I mean, when you're coaching in New England, there's no shortage of programs up the street, across the river, they're all right there. So I was, constantly trying to get best practices from wherever I could. But I think it's important to, when you do things like that, you can be a student of the game, you can learn someone's new, shiny, slick offense, but does that really work for your team and your personnel? So part of what I was doing always in off seasons was learning from different coaches and pulling up synergy and finding like who are the best teams at out of bounds plays, what are some of the best ATOs, who's best in transition, what are they doing. But I would say like I threw away more than I took, and I think that's important too. Not everything works with your personnel and your team. And so finding ways to maximize that, again, like recruiting to MIT, I wasn't recruiting to a system or a style of play. I was recruiting the best player available always. That was, highly admissible academically. Right. So that means, you might get more forwards, you might get more guards, you might get, shooters, you might get like really quick players, and some combination of all of them. And the next year could be different. So finding ways to be able to adapt and adjust, keeping the system simple, if you will, and really trying to coach up the communication part, the reads, the reactions. And so, yeah, I've taken a lot from a lot of different places, but I've always tried to make sure that it's really tailored to the strengths of the players that I have.
It's so interesting to me. You're at MIT, but it was the jump to the NBA when you get hired by the Memphis Grizzlies that you've cited as your jump in analytics, just because of what's more widely available, right? I mean, do you feel like, you sort of think about it in hindsight, MIT is now available on Synergy, so now you could do some different things than you could have done at the time. But like, how much of a revelation was that for obviously the way you're thinking about things, the way the minds of your players were working when you get to the NBA and see, oh my God, look at all this data I now have.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it was just full on like basketball paradise for, a nerd, like me in that way. Just having the data that you have access to and the systems to be able to kind of mine some of that data, filter it, and again, find what is really actionable for your team, for your system. There's more information out there than you can possibly use. So the challenge is what information is important, what's just noise, and also, being open to maybe, like as a coach, you always have the eye test. Hopefully you can be open to like the numbers, and if the numbers say something maybe a little different than what you saw. I think that we can always, I think we're all good at like confirmation bias, and okay, I think that we need to, do X, Y, and Z, and then I go find numbers that can support it. But I think really being open and diving in and seeing what the numbers tell you. And again, those projects sometimes are really good for off seasons. Being able to do that on that like granular level in the NBA was great. Taylor Jenkins gave me a lot of opportunities to just like come up with a question or a hypothesis and then like run with it and, do a project on it or work with our analytics department to learn more about it. So that was a dream. Like I loved having that type of access. I for sure wish I had more of that when I was at MIT. But we did have a little bit by the end. We had Synergy, and I think that was a part of, helping us to keep improving. And we had our players looking at that too. And I think, again, like getting our players at MIT to be students of the game and to really learn the game of basketball, like they would sometimes come to me and tell me like, well, when you go under on a pick and roll against this person, or this person's only going on to her left shoulder in the post, and so we want to guard her this way. That's where those collaborative conversations happen. Selling MIT players on analytics was not hard.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, so I want to talk about sort of how it all comes together in segment 3, and we talk about what you'll be doing here in New York. A lot more to talk about with Sonia Raman. I'm Howard Megdal. You're listening to Locked On Women's Basketball. Back right after this, but first, Locked On Women's Basketball is brought to you by Amazon Fire TV. Did you know that your Fire TV is also an Xbox? I had no idea, but it turns out you can turn any TV into a gaming and entertainment hub with Fire TV Stick 4K devices, no console required. Just grab your paired controller, subscribe or sign in to Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to play. Dive into hundreds of premium titles from EA Sports College Football 25 to Call of Duty Black Ops 6 and Avowed as easily as you stream your favorite shows. It's gaming made simple, and it's all on your Fire TV. just head to amazon.com/FireTV Locked On. That's FireTVLOCKEDON to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices, including Fire TV Stick 4K second generation, Fire TV Stick 4K Max first and second generation, and Fire TV Cube third generation. Howard Megdal here, Locked On Women's Basketball, and we are talking about the long and winding path that Sonia Raman has taken to get to the New York Liberty. And so just by way of introduction, I'll say this. The Liberty have been ahead of the curve on analytics in a variety of ways. And I wonder, as you began considering this opportunity, how much that played a part in you thinking about making this next step and coming to join the New York Liberty?
It was certainly a part. I think the bigger part was, the people in this organization. And, this is a really modern style of basketball. You don't get to the point that they get to if you're not at a high level in analytics, along with a lot of other categories. So I think that was more just indicative of like who the Liberty are in general, being at the forefront in all areas, and trying to put together a championship product year after year, right? And coming off of a championship this past year, certainly, just a huge accomplishment for the organization, for the city, but not surprising as the more I learn about the Liberty and, being here now and seeing the detail that goes into every aspect of what we do, which, includes analytics. It's really at a high level, it's elite, it's excellent. And, it's no coincidence that then what you see on the floor is also all those things.
And related to that, obviously, this is a team that just won a championship. You've been known at every stop for trying to find higher percentage shots for your players, which is, obviously something a lot of people talk about. It's something you've been able to implement everywhere you've gone. The Liberty last year led the WNBA in shots either at the rim or beyond the arc, sort of the gold standard for the shorthand of what we're talking about. How do you go about finding ways to build on that? And is that a bit of a challenge when you're coming into a team that just won the WNBA title? How do you strike that balance?
It's the ultimate challenge, really. And I've never done it before. I'm learning as I go, but I'm really excited about it. And I certainly have a lot of thoughts. It's kind of the question that I've been obsessed with for months now. And there's not a lot. I mean, I think that's the beauty of it. When you get to this point, there's not a lot of like ways to move the needle, but there are still ways. You can always keep improving. The team that comes in second can keep improving, just like the team that comes in first can keep improving. And so I think that's something that when I went through this whole interview process really impressed me about the organization was how quickly they were turning the page to that exact question. How do we make the number one offense even better? How do we make like a top defense even better? What are all the aspects of our systems, of our player development, everything we do? How do we take the next step forward? And you have to, this is an incredible league. These are the best women in the world. And every team out there is also improving. And so that's the challenge for us. And I think there's ways to do that. I think for me, offensively, which is kind of the area that I'm slotted into a little bit more, I'm obsessed with space, just as most offensive coaches are, finding the space. At MIT, we started running a little bit more of a dribble drive concept. And even when we ran something to try to, attack a mismatch, a call play, almost everything kind of ended with that type of dribble drive spacing, a drive and kick. And part of what we were doing there was trying to create the biggest gaps we could, right? So wherever the ball is, create a large gap for that person to then make that 0.5 decision. This isn't, rocket science. We all say the similar things in basketball on the offensive side. But truly, how do we really find ways to create space, to attack space, to hold space, and that's constantly changing throughout the possession too. So how do you get your players to keep reacting to what is happening, to be the aggressors offensively, and to just try to create like the easiest shot possible on the court, for the shooter, and so that we're shooting, we're scoring early in the clock, we're playing with a lot of pace, we're making quick decisions. It's a fun style of play when the way that the Liberty share the ball, and we're certainly going to look to continue that. But like you said, like there's not a lot to improve on, but we'll find things and we'll keep poking at them, and anticipate what other teams are going to look to do to attack us, right? Defensively. Mm-hmm. We already saw what happened in the finals, and there's lessons to be learned and what we can build on there. But you also don't want to have this recency bias where that's all you look at is just that one series, because there's a lot of other, there's a lot of new coaches in the league, and they're going to all have ideas and game plans to try to give the Liberty their best shot. So trying to stay ahead of that, and build those habits every day in practice, so that, we're constantly, improving and getting to that point where we're ready to counter on whatever the defense gives us.
And probably even more fun to scheme when you're trying to create space and some of those bigs are 6'4" and capable of shooting it from anywhere, or 6'6" and capable of shooting it from anywhere.
Yeah, it's like a truly positionless group, right?
Right.
That was such a huge draw to this, the roster construction is incredible, and it's a really, really talented group of women that can play with so much versatility on both ends, and a really starting with Sandy, like just such a talented coaching staff. So of course I have a lot of ideas coming in and thoughts, but I'm also new to the league and I'm learning, and I just couldn't think of a better way to learn the league than from this group.
No, it's going to be fascinating to see. And again, for listeners, you probably know this, they've both been on the podcast, but the league is moving in Sonia's direction in terms of the way they're thinking about offense. You don't hire a Lynn Roberts in LA. You don't hire a Carl Smeshko in Atlanta without a hyper focus on finding the best possible shot. And what it's ultimately going to mean for the entire WNBA is a frankly more pleasing to the eye product, if you can believe it, after the year we just had last year. But it's going to be incredible to see. Last thing before I let you go, I'm so generous with your time and we really appreciate it. I understand you went to a getaway for the coaches in Phoenix with Sandy Brondello and the whole group together. Take me through what that was like. What did you guys do? What did you learn from it? And how big a part has that been of sort of your introduction to the WNBA?
Yeah, it was great. It was the first time that we were all together as a staff. And, we were out in Phoenix, as you said, for our coaches retreat, talked a lot of hoops. We were there for a few days. We had a pretty good agenda, going through, various categories, offense, defense, player development, all of it. But more importantly, I think there was some really good staff bonding, some camaraderie. We were kind of all together in an Airbnb. So there was a lot of just organic time, like throwing an NBA game on when we were done with our day and watching games together, getting some meals together as well. And, a little pickleball, and can throw that in there. I can say that Sandy and Olaf are elite when it comes to that.
They are. I was going to ask who won.
I didn't even get close to the court. I was like, no, you guys got it.
Understood. Well, that sounds fantastic. This is all fascinating, and I can't wait to watch the retooled offense. It's coming sooner than you think, less than a month away. So very excited about that. Sonia Raman, welcome to the WNBA. So glad that I get to cover you, and wishing you all the best. To our listeners, I want to thank you for making us your first listen every day. We will be back with you tomorrow as well, talking about the Paige Bueckers introduction in Dallas. So quite a few things to break down from there. Until then, I am Howard Megdal, wishing all of you a wonderful Wednesday.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.